Anyway, so I'm Matthew Jones. Apologies for the name thing. It's a peculiar piece that goes with this particular account. And I'm from your party in Glasgow. Obviously speaking on my own as for the Campaign for Mass Workers Party. Obviously, as comrades know, we're sitting in a position where now your party has actually elected a central executive committee, which always sounds like a sort of backstairs Stalinist meeting, and is supposed to be organising itself in order to move forward and have branches and stand in elections. However, none of that appears to be happening. So here to help us with this, navigate our way through the current situation and explain what's been going on. We have Sophie Wilson, who was elected from Yorkshire to the said CEC, and thanks very much to her. So she's going to start with a brief presentation, in terms of outlining what's happened with the two meetings that took place on Tuesday and then on this past Sunday, and people can then ask questions. Obviously, if you've got particular questions on this, because I think it's obviously a new thing in those terms. And I've seen various notes of those meetings, but certainly don't have a view of what's actually going on the atmosphere or any of that sort of stuff. So yeah, particular for people to ask questions at the start. So okay. Thanks, Sophie. We'll leave your presentation from the start then.
That's fine.
Could I just
go on,
say,
Nigel?
could I just say that I also wondered if Sophie at some point this evening might reflect on the way she sees things developing. I think that would be really helpful at some point. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'd probably like to start with that because I don't want to bamboozle you all with a lot of facts about the meetings and the amendments. But the way I think I see things developing is definitely that, I know this is Campaign for a Mass Workers Party, which I believe in. And if we are going to get that, I think the way that's going to be achieved is through grassroots organising, membership, branches when we get them set up. I think that's really key. And people continuing to meet regionally or in tendencies, however they choose, as they have been doing. And I think that's where the real power lies going forward. And that's not to kind of take responsibility from me and onto you, but I do think that's where the power is, as always in this movement, now more than ever. And happy to answer questions on that after as well, Nigel. But that's the way I see it developing. And one of the key things is going to be getting those branches set up, but in the meantime, continuing to organise without those formal structures. And I think we've seen great examples of that up and down the country. So I'd really like that to continue and not get to not lose faith too much in each other and our own politics. But I'll go into kind of a recap of what's happened. I'm Sophie Wilson. I was elected on the Yorkshire seat for the CEC, and I stood on the grassroots left slate. So if you're not aware of that, that's fine. I can fill you in via questions afterwards, and you can check that out online and the organisations that were involved in putting that slate together. That can be circulated. And also just to say, I'm not sure if comrades in the room have read it, but we did release a report collectively as the slate earlier today. And Naomi Wimborne Idrissi, who was not on the slate but was endorsed by the slate and is closely aligned to us, has also had her own report. One of the other independents, Sam Gorst, has put his own out as well. So I'm not sure if you've read those. I'm sure those can be circulated at a later time. I'm sorry in advance for how long that report was. I think the first bit is 19 pages, and after that there's 9 pages of appendix items. So I'm sorry for that in advance, but there was a lot circulated before this meeting, and I think we just wanted to be as transparent as possible and try to get ahead of questions before they come, so you've got as much information as you have. I'm sure not everybody in the room has had a chance to read all of that in its entirety, but we collectively wrote that, and that is now published. And I think that's in my opinion, a fair and accurate account of the last meeting. So After we won the election, well, there was a couple of comrades. Obviously, grassroots left didn't win a majority on the CEC, but after the CEC elections, not much happened that weekend, and we were told, I think on the last Monday, we've got a meeting on Tuesday. That meeting on Tuesday was just an introductory meeting. I think that's a good idea. I think one of the things that we wanted out of that was some channels to communicate with each other, probably just a WhatsApp for now. And it seemed that those on the many slate weren't up for that. And I wish I could stop talking about it in terms of slates, but it does seem that everybody is voting in a block at the minute, and isn't relenting on that. So we've got no form of communication with each other. We had that introductory meeting. That was chaired by Jeremy Corbyn. On the agenda was a chair election, so there was a bit of a kerfuffle about that. It had originally been said it would be interim. During the meeting, it seemed like it wasn't going to be interim. We raised it. It seemed there was confusion, whether deliberate or otherwise. It seemed if we'd not raised the point, that would have been the election for the permanent chair of the CEC, which is one of the officer roles which is in the constitution. There's a couple more. Again, there's quite a bit more detail in the report. Sorry, I can just Sorry, I got muted by the host, it said.
Sorry.
Carry on. Is that okay?
Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
Carry on.
Carry on, sorry. Just mute everybody and start again. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you for that. Where was I? Oh yeah, so no issue with there being a permanent chair. Obviously that had to happen. But the points that we raised were things like, we've not seen the standing orders, those haven't been passed yet. We haven't seen any remit to the chair. So how can we vote on a chair when we don't actually know what the chair's going to be doing? It's my opinion that a chair should probably be one of the worst roles, that one that you don't have, because it takes away your voice. And there's obviously an alternative view that the chair has or ends up with the most power. So we wanted to see that before we actually elected anybody. One of the other points was, we had about 30 seconds to introduce ourselves to each other. We don't actually know each other. If we're going to work together in a unified fashion, and make this party the best it can be, it would be far better to get to know one another beforehand. I know there was quite a lot of heated debate on Twitter. I stay off Twitter myself mostly, so I've only heard about some of it secondhand. But I think there was comments about the interim chair, which was Jen Forbes, has one of the other CEC members blocked on Twitter. Again, I'm not involved in any of this, but I do think it's a worry if you can't have a chair that can work with everybody, or can be a unifying presence, which is one of the, in my opinion, bare minimum things a chair has to be. So we did get that. That managed to get back to the original proposal. That was just the interim chair. And then we were told a few days later that the next meeting, which would be the full CEC meeting, would be held on the Sunday just gone. The interim chair invited agenda points. I'll be honest, I think we've dropped the ball a little bit on this because we didn't submit any motions for this. And that was because I was kind of taking it in good faith in the way that the chair had presented this, that it was going to be, a collectively decided agenda, and we'd talk about priorities going forward. And it was my hope that we'd get to co-create some of these documents, like the standing orders, and we'd talk about what our priorities for each thing is. It didn't happen. We were sent, I think, 36 pages less than 24 hours before the meetings. I think it was about 5 or 6 p.m. the night before. And many of us were, myself, I was travelling down to London the next day on the train at 9 o'clock. So we sent 36 pages of documents the night before. And then one was amended at about 11:30 at night. I was already asleep. So saw that in the morning. So during that day on the train, for most of us, we got some amendments in, and in that report I mentioned earlier, the amendments are listed in full, so you can see those in the appendix at the bottom. And most of them, well, in fact, all of them, were around democracy and healthy debate. And I'll cut to the chase that all of them lost. So there was just block voting throughout. Every single one lost. The meeting was, to be honest, and I hate coming to these meetings with kind of bad news or feeling like I'm slagging people off. But the meeting really was a shambles. The hybrid facility wasn't working. It had been scheduled for 2 hours, 45 minutes. We'd said from that initial Tuesday meeting, and then every time any of us had emailed in with any agenda points, that it needs to be a full day affair. We need a full day to discuss and debate and get through some of the most important topics, which obviously you can't do anything without the standing orders and the remit of the officer roles. You can't do anything without a code of conduct. And without those ground rules in place on how we actually have the debate. And then we wanted some of the really important debates about branch formation and local elections, and there were a couple more as well. But branch formation and local elections, absolutely top of the priorities, I think, for me personally. So they were voted down in their entirety. I would encourage you to read them. Some of them were things like in the... Let me just go back. Sorry, I've just finished cooking tea, so I'll just get them up so I don't repeat myself. 1 second. Frequency of meetings was one of them. Basically just trying to have it standardized when they would be and how long we would meet for. I don't think anybody was particularly set or fussed on how long that is. It has to be an appropriate amount, but I think we proposed a monthly meeting that'd be a day in length, and then weekly online meetings for 2 hours. Wasn't completely wedded to that. I think the point was we were wedded to at least having some set frequency of meetings. That was voted down, as they all were. We also had an amendment on notice for meetings to allow more planning for member schedules. Many of us have got caring responsibilities, myself included, and that was voted down. And up to that point, there'd not actually been any debate, and we were told that we can only have 30 seconds to present each amendment, and there'd be no for or against. It just went straight to the vote. And the other thing I'd like to point out is these amendments were not circulated in advance. They probably couldn't be, because a lot of these amendments, were submitted around midday, just before the meeting, a couple hours before the meeting, but they weren't printed out, and there was no time allowed to actually read through them, which was disappointing. So at that point, that's when we said, if you're voting against these, we'd really like to know why you're voting against them. We got a couple of answers at first, until I think the next one was one of the things that I put forward, which was around the accountability of the Secretariat, as the current staff are calling themselves. And this was around, so my idea was something that I think is pretty standard in the trade union movement and the labour movement, which many of us have been a part of, and it was to separate CEC meetings into sections. So it could be part 1, part 2, part 3. In one, it's perfectly acceptable to invite staff or people from other groups to attend and give presentations, but the actual debate and the voting happens in a closed meeting. And the idea behind that isn't that it's a secret debate or anything. The minutes can be published. I've actually no issue with it being recorded and then put online afterwards on the membership portal. But the idea behind that is that you can't have any outside interference within that debate, and that lost. One of the other CEC members, when asked for a response about why they voted that down, said it was because there was lots online about unelected bureaucrats, and there was a sentence within that amendment that talked about publishing the names of staff, which is very standard in Parliament. So MPs have to have their staff published. Again, I'm not massively wedded to that. So immediately I said, I'm absolutely fine to get rid of that sentence. If that's the sticking point, because they'd said that they agreed with a lot of it and they could vote for it if it just wasn't for that sentence. So I said, happy to change that. Let's just get rid of that. Or perhaps I could propose that we start voting in parts. And the response was still, no, not today. No, I'm like, we're still not going to vote for it, even if you do that. And after that, no response was given to any of the other amendments, which was disappointing. So we don't know why they voted against a lot of them. And I'm sorry, there were quite a few. So I can't really go through them all, but you can ask questions on them. Some of them were on limiting the chair's power and other things around the officer group, because I think as it stands with the current standing orders, which were passed on the Sunday meeting, I feel that a lot more power is being given to the officers group than I think the membership intended. This was meant to be collective leadership. Obviously, there have to be an officers group for practical reasons, but I think we didn't intend that to be something where they go away and run the party and run back, essentially turning the CEC into just a scrutiny committee. It should be the other way around. It should be the CEC instructing the officers group, not the officers group reporting back after the fact. So there was a few amendments on that. And I think throughout it was just felt, there was no time set aside at all for any democratic debate. And the mood and the atmosphere of the meeting was that, lots of tutting that we'd presented amendments, which I've honestly never had in a meeting like this before. Even when I was in the Labour Party, I was a councillor, sat in a party with people who I opposed internally, and also sat debating with Lib Dems, Conservatives, UKIP, Greens at time. And I think we all respected the idea that we have to have a debate. I mean, I'm sure people have set in their minds how they're going to vote, but I think it's good for the record, especially when you are essentially a delegate, you're elected by other people, by the membership. I think it's good for the record for people to say why they're voting for or against. And I think it would be true collective leadership for us to have disagreements, but to then perhaps come up with some sort of composited version of standing orders, some kind of compromise. And we were very willing to compromise on a lot of these points, some of them absolutely not. But things like I explained, like the revealing of the staff names, I wasn't particularly, that wasn't the hill I was going to die on, to be honest. And I think one that I was particularly disappointed with was actually in the officers' roles and responsibilities. So a whole paper was presented on that as well. And that was the one that was amended gone 11 p.m. at night. So it had no reference to what was amended, but just a new document was submitted. And we noticed, in fact, it was Candy Williams who noticed, that the difference was within the membership officer's role, they deleted a paragraph that talked about reaching out to diverse communities, including BAME communities and marginalised communities, and encouraging that within the membership, which despite the membership officer being unconstitutional, which I'll come to in a minute, I've no issue with the membership officer. I think it's probably a good idea if it's done right. And I thought that clause was a good one. So I was really surprised. And I think despite kind of, factional disagreements, I still cannot work out why that was deleted. So Candy Williams resubmitted that. She changed the word BAME to global majority and said that's one that's more modern and appropriate. Absolutely fine. And she resubmitted it, and it was voted down again. And as part of her 30-second speech, she said, this is almost exactly the same wording, except I've changed BAME to global majority. And I just want to know why this was deleted from the original text. And there was no response given. And we were told to be quiet by the chair, essentially. And then one of the other CEC members, Solma, tried to speak out. So she was on Zoom, And she was just trying to express that I think that she was personally very upset by this. And she got muted, and then the chair asked for the host capabilities for the Zoom from one of the staff members that was running it, so that she could keep her muted for longer as well, which yeah, it was quite upsetting to sit through, you know, a Muslim woman actually be muted when talking about the clause that is the one of the anti-racist clauses within the party that she's a member of and has been elected to be part of the collective leadership for. So that was the mood of the meeting. After that, we moved on to, and I'm probably missing a lot, I'm sorry. After that, we moved on to the actual officer elections. And in that report, we've detailed who won and who stood. I think notably Naomi nominated Louise Regan for chair and said that, you know, she'd be happy to vice chair underneath her. Jen Forbes was their candidate, who was already the interim chair, and as I've said earlier, I think was, you know, abusive of that position at times, and had set not an appropriate amount of time at all to discuss some of these important things. So we were not happy with Jen Forbes for a lot of reasons. And Naomi said that Louise could perhaps be a unifying candidate. Lots of people know Louise, and she's well respected amongst the movement. And I think that was a really good move from Naomi. I think it really showed, you know, that we are willing to work with a lot of them. And we'd like to get to know them on an individual basis and kind of see where we are aligned and where we're not. But Louise rejected that. I think she said that she didn't have time, which she actually then later stood for a political officer and won that. So anyway, so the rest of the names are in there. We all put someone forward ourselves and obviously lost the entire thing. Sam Gus stood for membership officer. I seconded his nomination just to ensure he could stand. I don't actually think he voted for himself. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn got parliamentary leader. And parliamentary leader and membership officer were not in the original constitution. Again, I don't actually believe in a parliamentary leader, because that wasn't the point of the collective leadership. Membership officer, fine, but even so, it was not the hill I was going to die on. You know, if people want that, and if it would have been ratified by an all-member vote, which I actually think it would have been if that had been put forward, I think that would have gone through, and that's absolutely fine. I do feel that's probably, by and large, you can disagree with me and let me know what you feel, but by and large, I think it's probably the will of the membership to have Jeremy Corbyn as a parliamentary leader, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But what I'm not fine with is in the earlier past code of conduct, which I've not touched on, but included a lot around confidentiality. So we're all probably going to get told off the next meeting for sharing a lot of this information. I'm not sure, although it wasn't quite clarified what that means or what kind of panel that actually goes to if you are reported. But anyway, in the earlier code of conduct, it was really explicit that CEC members have to abide by the constitution, things passed at conference, and all member votes. And immediately, you know, it just feels like a two-tier code of conduct, because right there, in my opinion, is a breaking of that code of conduct by immediately going ahead and electing people to these positions. We knew it was going to happen, and I thought that was probably going to be the worst of the meeting, but it wasn't. After that, we had some staff reports. It was not that illuminating, to be honest. I think probably the most illuminating bit of it was currently the party spending £16,000 a month on staffing, plus £7,000 on staff seconded from the Peace and Justice Project. I think they've said in no uncertain terms that we can't name those staff. And there was a few other bits. Naomi raised a point about the Electoral Commission's, they released a report on donations to political parties, and she raised the point around the drama, which many have probably heard of, around the MOU funds, which Zara needs to transfer to the party, which is my understanding that she's tried quite a few times. And I think she sent Naomi on quite a bit of evidence around that, and it's been blocked, and she wants to transfer all the remaining funds as soon as possible. So Naomi's question was asking the newly elected treasurer for Dell, how he plans to handle that. Will he do it as soon as possible? But as soon as it was kind of mentioned, a point of order was raised that there's a conflict of interest here because Zara's in the room. I don't really accept that because I believe Jeremy is a director of your party as well, which, he's allowed to talk about the financial matters. But either way, it was then put to a vote that the discussion needed to end and be passed to the officer group. So I think we saw it straight away, our fears about serious matters being handed to the officer group, and the discussion on that was shut down. And then we finally then managed to move on to a couple other agenda items, which was an Iran statement that was passed unanimously, despite a couple of statements about Iran already being put out by your party since the CEC election, which I didn't disagree with the statement, but I did disagree that it didn't go through the newly elected CEC first. And then there was a local elections paper. So it was presented pretty briefly, and we were very strictly reminded that we were just a couple minutes until our deadline of finishing the meeting, which again, we'd said wasn't long enough anyway. And this was passed. And I think this is probably one of the better things that came out of the meetings, that at least that actually got things going. There was quite a few questions raised by us. Some of the things like, how will the campaign funding be managed? And it seems like candidates are maybe expected to self-fund. Who will sit on the appeals panel for candidates that are rejected by the standing office, by the officer group? How is this officer group going to manage this? Because that's what they were saying, that's where it's going to go. And it also seemed like there was a proposed administrative fee for candidates wanting to go through the selection process. I raised a question about it said that the officer group would facilitate a selection if multiple candidates wanted to stand, and I was raising the point that I think it should be the local CEC members that are involved in that process. None of these questions were answered, and we were told that the officer group will come back with an answer next time. So again, the same, I think, fear was realised. We did submit an amendment. So this was proposed by Grace Lewis and Megan Clark, one of the more disappointing bits of the meeting as well. And so there was a list of independent groups. We clarified that isn't exhaustive, and there'll be some form of affiliation strategy for local groups who want to stand candidates and get support and backing from your party. But one of our amendments to that was that if they do have any founding documents, that it's that they say that they're explicitly socialist, and that was voted down. And that was one of the ones that we did get an answer for, and the answer to that was that it was a purity test, which I don't agree with. I think perhaps that would be valid if we defined socialism. There are lots of different ways of defining it, and said that it has to be exactly this. This is how we define it, and this is how you have to define it as well. But the only thing that it said, and the only thing that we wanted, was for these groups to say that they're socialist. So that was battered away pretty quickly. And then the last agenda item, which was meant to be branch formation, we didn't get to, which we're very disappointed about. And I think, was it you, Matthew, mentioned about Scotland? So Niall did raise that. He'd raised that he sent a letter and not got a response. He was told that he will get a response as soon as possible from the chair. So yeah, we didn't get to branch formation, which I didn't actually think we were about to, because no papers were circulated for that agenda item. So I don't think there was much intention of that happening in the first place. And I didn't even think the 2 hour 45 minutes was enough for standing orders, never mind all the rest of it. Especially when I think, when you're saying that democracy is very important, which it is, and this is the foundational document that enables democracy, I think some care and attention should have gone to that. But if you're looking for silver linings, we do now have standing orders, we do now have a code of conduct, and we have some officers in position, and we do have the beginnings of a local election strategy, which should be worked on as a priority. And I'm sorry if I've just spoken at you. I don't know how long I've spoken for. I'm sorry if that was quite a while. My apologies. That's everything I can remember right now, and I'm happy to take questions.